pay anything, and I was like, just forget it, I'm not doing it. You'd be surprised, there's a lot of appraisals that'll get done, but they won't even mention any historical stuff. I always try to mention, I think it's a good thing, and I put in my report, this is not an historical appraisal, and no reproduction costs were considered. It was not part of the scope of this assignment. That's probably the best way to protect yourself. Yes, different principles are not always the same. You have to look at the zoning. If it's zoned for commercial or office, or it might be two alternatives: conversion to office or raise it. Because basically, a lot of these older buildings were way before zoning. And if it's now commercial and there's a demand for that area, and you have an old dilapidated, 150-year-old home, it might make more sense to raise it and redevelop as commercial. If the property is limited to residential and restrictions prohibiting the demolition of the structure, then the highest and best use is as improved. Get the cost, income, and sales. Any valuation approach can be applied for a historic home if it's done correctly or be developed carefully. Cost is very difficult to apply to historic, but it can. You have to, reproduction cost is required. The quantity survey method, I misspoke, I said unit in place. That's the quantity survey method. Income approach could be when it's used or converted into an income producing unit. You kind of see that in some areas, especially around where you're going to see this. You're going to see this around college campuses, where a lot of these old Victorian or historical homes have been here since the university was developed, and over the years they've been turned into sorority and fraternity houses. So a lot of those are, in fact, historic homes, and or they've been turned into apartments. Some of the challenge with the sales comparison approach is finding other comps in the market similar, isolating adjustments for the physical features that apply to the comparables, and need to go outside subjects market and back in time, and qualitative techniques may also be used. When considering data, we have to consider the market participants for the property and determine what is truly comparable. We saw that in the earlier case study when we were looking at the circular homes, or my church house example, how we had to go back and try to find similar homes that were a market participant would consider as alternative for consideration. Once you find them, they need to be, and if they need to be adjusted for location or market, the remaining physical characteristics can be difficult to isolate and quantify. And that's why you may have to do some qualitative techniques for the final reconciliation to address those physical deficiencies. So you probably all did this, but which is the answer in this one? 1 finger for A, 2 finger for B, 3 fingers for C, 4 fingers for D. Very good. Thank you. Yeah, I had to look this one up when I was doing the quiz. I knew it wasn't roster. I knew it was Canadian Register, and then it's historic places. All right. All right. Anybody have any questions on this chapter 4 quiz? If not, I'm going to blow through it. All right. All right. Mixed use and small commercial properties. Get lined up with the textbook again. I actually think we're moving quite fast. I was a little worried about it, but yeah, we have less than 80 slides to go and an hour to go. So not too well, an hour and 8 minutes. So maybe I'll talk a little slower. All right, so on the bottom of page 71, you really want to pay attention to the key terms on the right. You need to know what these terms and terminologies stand for. Most importantly, capitalization. Now, you're not going to really deal with capitalization on a single family property. You need to know how to develop a capitalization rate for a mixed use or a larger income producing property or a bigger industrial, commercial or industrial property. And what effective gross income is, what a gross income multiplier is, what a gross rent multiplier. Now, the gross rent multiplier is something that you will need to know for a residential, especially when you're dealing with 2 unit and 3 unit apartment buildings or duplexes, whatever you guys call them up there. But because that does play an important role, because investors do look for the income producing qualities on those multifamily properties. And you have to know how to develop that gross rent multiplier, which we'll go through here in a minute. And mixed use property is basically one or more than one notable use, such as something with residential use and something with a non-residential use. Most mixed use buildings, and you'll see in a lot in like downtown Toronto or downtown Chicago, which by the way, Chicago is in Toronto are very similar. Every time I've been to Toronto, I feel like I'm in Chicago because I'm usually in the areas where it's fun to be at, and it reminds me of Chicago. And buildings actually look the same on a lot of levels, but it's usually a store, I mean, a bar or a restaurant on the first floor with an apartment above. It might be a barber shop, beauty shop with an apartment above. It might be a barber, might be a shoe store in the front with an apartment in the back, an efficiency apartment in the back. Those are kind of your most common mixed use. I've been doing a bunch of industrial condominiums where you have there were condominium use, but at the same time there's multiple units in there, and then the bank calls and they want one valuation for the whole project. So that's been a little bit interesting. Not your for sure definition of mixed use, but something nonetheless. Net operating income, that's what you're always looking for in order to capitalize, to get a value by the income or capitalization approach to value. Pass-through zoning allows a lesser defined use, such as residential in like a commercial. It's kind of like, I kind of look at pass-through zoning as kind of like an interim use zoning. So you remember that example I said earlier, you have that residential house on Main Street, North America, and a lot of those houses on the Main Street have been converted into a dentist office or a doctor's office or antique store. But then here's your place. It's still just used as residential use, but it's commercial or business or retail zoning. So technically, you know, it's not to its highest and best use at that point unless you do the analysis to see if it's worth more as a commercial or residential. So this pass-through zoning to me is kind of something like that, kind of an interim use. And then potential gross income, this is what could be produced with no vacancy or collection loss. And then the only other thing I skipped was the gross income multiplier, and that's similar to a gross rent multiplier, but a gross income multiplier contains all the income from the other sources. So if you have laundry in there, you get income from laundry, you get income from garage parking spaces, that type of stuff. Um,
And GIM is annual, actually based on annual income, and GRM is on monthly, right?
well, gross rent multiplier is we do everything usually on an annual basis, unless if you're doing a test question, you have to make sure you pay attention to how they word any of these questions if they ask monthly or annually. Okay, and as you'll see, probably the best thing that I tell my students over the years is when you're taking your test and you're get an income question, always draw a triangle. This is your IRV triangle: income, rate, value. And whatever the question says, if it talks about income, write it in here. If it talks about value, put it in here. If it talks about a rate, put it in here. And they're always going to give you 2 out of 3. And by drawing this, and so you to make life easier, income. So income divided by value gives you a rate, and you just draw. So that's always going to keep you set. Same thing with other income property questions on there. So that's a good rule of thumb to have. So like here, this first bullet point here, a residential appraiser may come into realization he or she has just stepped into the non-residential world. So just to give you the difference between our two fine nations is in the states, you have to be licensed by a state, and there is a state licensed category. There's a state certified category and a general certified. In order to do non-residential work, you have to be a general certified appraiser. And a lot of states have already eliminated the state licensed category and changed that to the trainee level. So you really only have a state certified where you can appraise anything except for commercial. So up basically from 1 to 4 families. Now I understand up in Canada that residential appraisers can just appraise from 1 to 3 units, correct? Anything over 4 units requires more of a commercial appraiser. Okay. So a lot of times, we would get calls from our appraiser goes out there, or they're doing a preliminary analysis and they see it's a commercial, and then we have to let the client know we have to reassign it to somebody else in our company that has the necessary qualifications on that. I think this is a standard. See, it doesn't really make a difference whether we're talking mixed use properties here or residential. It's just to get at the highest and best use, the appraiser has to be familiar with the various ranges of uses a property could accommodate due to zoning. Really, that's really important because I cheat a lot. I don't know if you guys have a great all your provinces or the towns. If I'm doing an appraisal, I just kind of go. If I'm in a town called Willow Springs, that happens. I just go to Google and I type Willow Springs zoning map, and it pulls it up. And 9 out of 10 cities will have online zoning maps. You pull it up, you find where it is. I snip it, and I put an arrow on it, and then I put it in as an exhibit. And then if it's residential or R1, R2, R5, or whatever it happens to be called, then I go to the zoning code, building code, and I look and I see what the zoning requirements are. What's the minimum lot size requirement? What's the setback requirements? What's the building height? It'll go through there, and I'm sure all of you have do this on a regular basis. But if for some reason you're not, you really should be doing it, because that's going to protect you to make sure that you're not doing an inaccurate highest and best use, and check whether or not the property really is in conformance with the zoning. Let's see. When looking at commercial structures that could be adapted to multiple uses, the potential for conversion and related conversion costs need to be analyzed. And we talked earlier, I was talking a little bit about compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act. I'm assuming that's applicable in Canada. Is it not? Anyone? Bueller? Okay, well, maybe that's a question we can find out later on about. But this is the one where I said it's specifically tailored for folks with disabilities to make sure they have full access and use of the property. Oh, let's see here. Maybe this. Oh, you have something else. This is the main federal laws which protect people with disabilities from discrimination: the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the Canadian Human Rights Act. The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedom is part of the Canadian Constitution, which sets about 15 basic rules. No, that contains the basic rules about how our country operates. And Section 15, regardless of any discrimination, is to be considered equal. This means that governments must not discriminate on any of these grounds in its laws or programs. See, one of you guys should have been able to say, no, we have the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. All right. And then, for example, programs to improve employment opportunities for people with mental or physical disabilities may be protected under Section 15, subsection 2, for transportation, employment, voting, and rights in criminal proceedings. Now, I didn't know if you know this. If you hover over your cursor over those bullet points, it'll give you the links to those. So if you want to, if you try that, it gives me a hyperlink. See, I just clicked on it and I am all the way on the rights of people with disabilities in Canada. All right, now I just lost the damn PowerPoint. Yeah. There it is. Okay, so that's good to know. So if you're like, I'm not sure where to find the information, you can always open up the PowerPoint and click on the link, or at least click on them and then save them as one of your favorites. ADA defines these structures as falling into one or more of the following categories. Now, I would think this would be somewhat similar with the Canadian Charter, but it's like I said earlier, like for a hotel or a motel, a restaurant, bar, theater, auditorium, stores, grocery store, hardware store, laundromats, terminal, train station, museum, library, zoo, amusement park. There's a lot of things: daycare center, gymnasium, commercial, nursery. So the ADA addresses the areas of existing structures, alteration of existing structures, and new construction, and has specific requirements for various uses, types, and sizes. And because the act's so detailed, the appraiser should approach the idea of conversion with great care. And when you review plans and specs for non-residential new construction, the appraiser should be observant of ADA. Now, like I said, I'm not sure if that's applicable, but if that falls under the Canadian charter, then you should be aware of that as well. So part of, and I don't know how many questions are going to be on ADA, but might as well go through these so you're aware of them. ADA addresses specific broad areas such as removal of architectural barriers and special provisions such as parking, exterior accessibility, drinking fountains, telephones, ramp and stairs, doorways, lobbies, elevators, room sizes. All right. Let's get to our definition of gross building area. And this is a little bit different from the lower states here, but gross building area uses the exterior dimensions of the above grade or superstructure or below grade of a building. Gross leasable area is the total floor area used by tenants, including the below grade. Calculated from midpoint between the partitioning walls, and if the unit has outside walls, the measurement would extend to the other outer surface, as the illustration shows there, from inside to inside here. Let me see. Kind of falling behind here on my ADA 75. All right. Trade fixtures are usually associated with a business or a profession operating in or on the property. Not like fixtures, they are not considered part of the real estate and are considered personal property no matter how they are attached. Lighting, plumbing, shelving, signage, air supply lines, restaurant equipment, storage tanks, and pumps and canopies at a gas station. So, any questions so far about gross leasable area and gross building area? See, in down here, gross living area, GLA, that's only above grade. And in GBA is the entire building, all floors. So you can do the same thing on a non-residential appraisal as you can with a residential appraisal. You can do a standard appraisal report, or you can do a restricted appraisal report. And at the same time, both of those are typically in a form report, but they can also be done in a narrative format. You will find the majority of non-residential, larger commercial, industrial, larger multifamily buildings are all done in a narrative format. You'll also see hybrid reports where they'll use part form and then the rest supplement with a narrative where it actually looks like a whole narrative report anyway. Gross rent multiplier is you take that from your comparable rentals in the area to estimate the value of the property. And it's based on the total gross rent. So no consideration is made for expenses, vacancies, and collection losses. So this is real important. So if you are, because they're going to try to trick you with test questions on here. So if your rent is $1,000 a month and it's on an annual basis, your gross rent is $12,000 a year. But after you get your gross rent, the first thing you always do is you you deduct vacancy and collection loss. All right. And so you usually need to know that ahead of time, or you have market data, and typically range from 3 to 8%, sometimes higher, sometimes maybe a little less. Once you deduct out vacancy and collection loss, then you have effective gross income, EGI. Okay. So when you're doing questions and you're looking at stuff, remember, effective gross income that's after vacancy and collection loss has been deducted from your total gross rent. Okay. So nice and simple formula here. To sell it, you look for rental properties that recently sold. Selling price is divided by the gross rent, or could command, arriving at a gross rent multiplier. So you'll see here. Let's see if not there yet. So if your rental price, if your sales price of the property is $100,000, and you are dividing that by your annual rent of, say, $12,000 at $1,000 a month, your gross rent multiplier is 8.3. You can reverse the thing. The gross rent is then multiplied by the GRM in the first step to give an estimated value. So you take your $1,000 times your gross rent multiplier to come up with your value estimate. Your gross income, now here's what you have to pay attention to. Your gross income multiplier is going to add in income from the laundry, parking spaces, storage lockers. So it's your gross rent plus the other income times the gross income multiplier to get your value estimate. All right, just getting caught up here. Okay. Nice and best use may become complex. All right. So here's other factors to pay attention to for these highest and best use analysis. You have to consider the mix of uses in conjunction with the allowability to the current zoning regs. If it's zoned for commercial or office, residential use is usually allowed by virtue of pass-through zoning. That was what I was talking about earlier, that interim use kind of. Each unit should be independently accessible without infringing on another use. Now that's important, because I can't tell you where I have walked through a store, and then I open up the back door, and as soon as I open up the back door, I'm right in the apartment behind the store. So that doesn't leave that unit behind the store independently accessible and private from the store. Normally there would be two doors there, one to end the store and one to start the apartment. And you shouldn't be able to walk through one into the other without infringing. Okay. So finding the unit mix is one of the first elements you should recognize. Different mixes can translate into different risks and benefits, right? Whether, like, what do you think if you walked in and you have let me ask you this one. So what happens, you go to an area and it's mixed use, it's 2-story building, and you go in there and the first floor is a laundromat, and then the apartments above that, or the first floor is a car repair shop, and then there's an apartment over that. Do you see potential issues with that? Sure, both of them. You got pollution, you got exhaust fumes from both of those, whether it's a laundromat or car repair place. You got soot and dirt in there, and with laundromats, you got the whole PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls, which is a product of laundromats and stuff, at least in the older days on there. So I know, like when I worked at the bank, we in our appraisal policy guidelines, we would not accept mixed use properties that had residential associated with car repair shops and laundromats on there. Now there could be other ones too. I mean, it could be, I don't know. The list goes on. You can come up with your own ideas, but the point there with that bullet point is different mixes can translate into different risks and or benefits. Now, some folks might like to be in the apartment above a coffee shop. I come right downstairs and get their coffee every day. So ideally, the selection of sales data for the sales comparison approach should reflect properties that most similarly reflect the subject's income and unit mix. There's no rule regarding which technique's more appropriate or not on certain property types. And you have to use common sense when applying the GRM technique for properties that have significant dissimilarities. So the book says here, hey, there's a whole new appraisal career out here if you want to start learning how to appraise commercial work. Only thing is, I can tell you is, yeah, you wanna be a little careful. I will tell you, most appraisers, there's not many who do it all, who do residential, commercial, industrial, manufacturing, that type of stuff. You're usually going to have a residential that may get into some smaller mixed use on there. And then you have appraisers who all they do is they just do small commercial, just 6-unit apartment buildings, 10-unit, 12-unit apartment buildings, a small, 5,000 square foot retail building, that type of stuff. And then you have other appraisers who won't touch anything unless it's like a high-rise building or a couple 100,000 square foot industrial building. So you have and so you have a whole just breakdown of commercial appraisers that kind of specialize in one or the other. I never got into appraising the big monster properties. I kind of felt a little leery with my E&O policy, and we all know how E&O policies can be. Once I got over like the $20 million mark, I kind of wheeled back, and so I usually will do anything less than that as long as it's not too much over my head. And I have a group of, and what's good is you have a group of pairs that you can consult with to, if you don't have the experience, that you can gain some experience trying to learn out how to do these. But I have other appraisers. I got a couple buddies of mine. All they do is 71A forms and 71B forms, which is just multifamily on there. So it all depends on where you want to go. And we already talked that you could, if you wanted to do a niche, you could go into historical appraising. So there's a lot of different options here. So here's our case study here. We have a nice 2,000 square foot building, single story retail building. This is on page 80 that you can see. It's located on a 250 by 250 foot lot in an area similar retail properties. It doesn't have any adverse site influences. It's zone C2, which permits which permits retail use. And the highest and best use is felt to be present retail use. Retail properties are adjacent. Across the street's a restaurant and a bank. They're typically sold with a mix of owner occupied and tenant. None of the leased properties have recently sold. Property's owner occupied, but the owner's moving into a larger facility somewhere else and has found a tenant for a 5-year lease at $25 per square foot, triple net. All right. First thing to always remember, if you're the owner of a building and you want to rent it out, you want to get someone in, you want to get that triple net lease. Why do you want to get the triple net lease? Because then the tenant pays everything. They pay the taxes, they pay the insurance, they pay the repairs, they do everything. It's the way to go, and that's why especially industrial buildings with triple net lease are so popular and sought after by investors right now, especially when you have a long time historical lease that comes into play. Remember, the longer that lease comes into play, the more strength and the more weight. It's a more positive factor on there, because then the risk rate goes down that that tenant may not renew their lease. Now, most triple net leases are done in multi-year segments. 3 years with 5 3-year renewal options, with a cost of escalation of 4%, 7%, or based on the consumer price index, or whatever factor they put in there and how it was negotiated on there. And or it could be in 5-year increments. So the duration and the background of the lease plays an important role on there. So this is a 5-year, $25 a square foot lease, triple net lease. Taxes are for the building $4,500 and insurance is $1,350. The building was constructed in 2000. Typical floor plan, open retail at the rear, up in the front. At the rear, a half bath, office, storage for inventory, workspace. Crawl space has 20,000 square foot asphalt paved parking lot, and it's generally an average condition here. Everybody following this? Yep. All right. The client wants a summary report with all 3 approaches to value, sales comparison, and income, and a cost approach. So your letters of engagement still come across requesting summary reports, because there's that's old USPAP terminology. I mean, right now you only can produce an appraisal report or a restricted report now, as opposed to it used to be a self-contained summary and restricted use. So that probably should be worded to the client wants an appraisal report. All right, the basic premise on the sales comparison approach is that similar properties tend to sell for the same price in the marketplace. Yeah, may be true. That individual characteristics for each parcel need to be looked at for comparison and adjustments to past transactions to arrive at an estimated value for the property. And care must be taken when analyzing the available data to make sure the appropriate adjustments are made for physical and functional dissimilarities. So let's see here. But typically what we're going to find here is we'll end up most likely with a unit of comparison through different factors, but eventually it probably ended up at a price per square foot at the end of the day. So we have these 3 sales, all pretty close to size, 22, 23, 2100. 2 have parking lots, asphalt paved, 1 is a gravel. They're all in average condition. 2 were built in 2007. I think if I recall, we were in 2000. So we're looking at basically a 7-year age difference. They're all relatively recent in sale date. Sale 1 and 3 are inferior location. Sale 2 is similar in location. And we can see that the 2 in inferior location sold for $350,000 as opposed to $400,000 for sale 2. It gives us for adjustments. It's that adjustments are typically made on a percentage basis. So it's saying the market is not supporting a square footage adjustment. That's probably most likely because we're only looking at a very small variance on here, but we'll see how this appears at the end. Gravel parking lot, 3% versus an asphalt paved, 5% for a 7-year age difference, 5% for inferior location. What is the range of value for the subject property? So did you guys were given all this, so you want to write in all that information in here. You can see it. I just put it up on this PowerPoint slide here. So we have it all gridded out. 350, 400, 350, recent sale date. Building size, nothing. Now, I'm not necessarily sure that I would agree that a 2,000 square foot versus a 22 or 2,300 square foot should not be adjusted for. I could see between 2,000 and 2,100, but just going with the case study data that was provided, apparently there's no adjustment for that. So we start out. So basically, what we're doing here, folks, if you take your 350,000 sales price on comp 1, and you divide that by 2,200, you're going to come up with 159.09 per square foot. So you're going to do that all the way across the board. They're all the same condition. All right. So we have no adjustments there. Then we have age. All right. And so if we take, it already told us, and you can look at your page 81, it tells us the 7-year age difference is 5%. So since sale 1 was older than the subject property that was built in 2000, that's a plus 5% adjustment. And compared to sale 2 and 3, which were built in 2007, which are superior in age, they're being adjusted at minus 5% for building age. Location for sale 1 and 3 inferior are given a plus 5%. Our parking lot, sale 1 and 2 are the same, but the gravel lot is a plus 3%. So what you're doing is you're taking a look. Let's take a look at the adjusted column for sale 1. We have plus 5 for age, plus 5 for location. Our total adjustment is plus 10. Okay. And when you look at, it says plus 10. So if you take 159.09 times 0.10, that gives you 15.9. And basically that will round up to exactly 175. Because if I take 15.9 plus 159.09, that comes to 175, right on the dot. Everybody follow that? I know sometimes it can be a little confusing because you're thinking to take it off of the sales price, but actually what we're doing is we're developing a price per square foot range. And if you do now, you look at sale 2, you're at you are at -5 plus a minus, just a -5. So you come in at take 173.91 times 0.05, and then that's going to reduce your dollar amount down to 165 21. 73.91.05 is 8.7. Comes down to 165.21. Now for comp 3, we got -5 for age, +5 for condition, +3 for gravel lot. The plus and -5 equal out, leaving just a +3. So 166.67 times 0.03 will give you an adjusted price per square foot of 171.67. Does that is everybody follow that case study and know how to do that? Okay, and what you'll find here is it goes in order of the way they're supposed to be adjusted. The only thing that's missing is financing or seller concessions prior to the sale date, but that was not applicable for this assignment. All right. To determine the range, 2000 activity 1. Let me see, where is this one? Man, I make sure I'm activity 1. Hold on. Okay. Range of value, because we were at 2,000 square feet from the for our subject property, and if you look when we go above here, our low was 165.21, which was right here, and our high was 175. We apply it between 330, 2,000 times 165 gives us 330, 420, or at 175 square foot is 350,000. So nice. This is a nice simple interpolation on here is what value do you want to pick? And I see most commercial appraisers, this is what they're going to do, because this happens to be, they just did it by the sales comparison approach here. But I'll see this where they have done it, where they have 3 different values, one by the cost, one by the income, one by the sales, or they just do 2 out of 3. They'll usually pick something in the middle. So in this case, 340. 340 could be supported by the sales comparison approach. But realistically, if you picked $165 a square foot and you conclude at 330, then I would, remember I was telling you always tell the story and reconcile your conclusions. I'd say the value conclusion was based on the lower end of the price per square foot because of, you know, maybe the inside was a little outdated, or maybe it had some minor deferred maintenance, which was immaterial to the overall value, or the price per square foot was on the upper end of the price per square foot range from the sampling because the subject has all new windows and a new roof compared to the comparables that don't, you know, whatever you want to say. Or maybe it has a better view, or maybe for whatever, maybe there's a little bit more parking. Even though all those factors can be individually adjusted for, at the same time, you're letting the intended user know the reasoning while you reconcile either on the lower or the higher or in the middle. All right, where are we here? All right, income capitalization is a method used to convert a single year's estimate of income into a value indicated in the income capitalization approach. So it can be based off of, and remember, I was said earlier, potential gross income. What's that? Anything that can potentially come to your income, right? Could be your garage income, your laundry income, your rental income. Effective gross income is less vacancy and collection loss. Always remember that. Once you take away vacancy and collection loss to arrive at effective gross income, all right, now you have to take away your fixed and your variable expenses to arrive at your net operating income. So here's your three. Potential income. This is everything the place could potentially have for an income stream. Effective gross income, less vacancy and collection. Net operating income is less fixed and variable expenses. So this is where you're getting rid of your utilities, your insurance, your reserves, all that. Once you take all that, you end up with the net operating income, and that's going to be used as the basis for your capitalization to arrive at a value indication by the income capitalization approach. You follow me? Any questions? All right. Now, with income property, you have equity and mortgage income, you got land income or building income. So, I don't know. So let me show you this. Remember I was telling you, you draw a triangle